A little after midnight, Gordon Benning, a balding gastroenterologist with a perpetually dyspeptic expression on his long face, announced as he dealt the cards that his next deal would be his final hand. Several players indicated their agreement, and one, a CPA with a propensity for stating the obvious, said, "So this is the last round." And so it was. Richard Crail, Dick to his friends, Richard to his wife, who reserved the diminutive for a specific portion of her husband, would have preferred it otherwise. He wished the game could go on for another 3 hours so that he might recoup his losses, or that it had ended 3 hours earlier when he'd been briefly ahead. Now he had, 6-7 hands to get even? The game was dealer's choice, and 90% of the time the choice was 7-card stud. The dealer anteed a buck for the table. The limit was $5, $10 on the last card. The same betting rules applied in 5-card stud. In draw poker, the bet was $5 before the draw, $10 after. Crail was the host, as well as being the evening's big loser. In the latter capacity more than the former, he suggested doubling the betting limits for the final round. That was all right with Mark Taggart, who had a mountain of chips in front of him, but the other players shook their heads dismissively, and that was that. It was by no means unusual for someone, generally the biggest loser, to make the suggestion. It was always voted down. And that was just as well for Crail, as it turned out, because his luck was no better in the last round than it had been for the preceding 3 hours. It was worse, if anything, because desperation led him to play hands he'd have been well advised to fold at their onset, and to stay to the end in hands where he should have cut his losses. When Benning dealt the last hand of the evening, Crail chased flush and straight possibilities, backed into 2-pair, queens over 5s, tried to buy the pot with a raise, and lost to Taggart's 3 6s. "Hey, the night's a pup," he said. "No reason to quit now." No one even bothered to respond. They were all counting their chips and figuring out what they had coming, and in turn they announced their totals and waited for Crail to pay them. He'd set aside the cash they'd all bought in with, and when that was gone he still had 2 players to pay off, Norm MacLeod, who had $120 coming, and Taggart, who'd had a very good last round. He dug out his wallet, counted out 5 20s and a pair of 10s, and paid MacLeod, who looked almost apologetic as he pocketed the money. Taggart, who looked not at all apologetic, announced that the chips in front of him came to $538. "Stick around," Crail said. "I'll have to write you a check." The others left, and Crail shook their hands and wished them well. Then he took his time finding his checkbook. "Some run of cards," he said. "You caught a lot of second-best hands," Taggart said. "Nothing much you can do when that happens but wait for the cards to turn." They never did. "There's always next week." "I hate to wait that long," Crail said. He'd uncapped the pen but had not as yet touched it to the check. "You in a rush to get home? You want to play some more?" "I wouldn't mind." "Heads up, you mean? Just the 2 of us?" Crail made a show of looking to his left and right, then at Taggart. "I don't see anybody else here," he said, "so I guess we're stuck with each other." Taggart thought about it. "I'll just keep these chips, then." "Right, and I'll help myself from the bank." He did so, stacking the chips in front of him, giving himself a bigger bankroll than Taggart's. That would help psychologically, he told himself. The player with fewer chips was at a disadvantage, doomed to play with a loser's mentality. This way he could feel like a winner, and it was only a matter of time before he'd be one. Taggart didn't seem awed by Crail's chips. He arranged his own stacks, and for some reason the new arrangement made it look to Crail as though there were more of them. "Same rules?" Crail nodded. "Except we can forget about the 3-raise limit," he said, "since there's just the 2 of us." "Makes sense." "How about a drink before we get started?" "Good idea," Taggart said. Crail went to the bar and poured a brandy for each of them. They sat with their drinks, and he suggested they cut for deal, and then his wife walked into the room. She said, "Hi, hon, I hope it went," and stopped in mid-sentence when she realized her husband had company. "Hello, Tina." "Mark," she said, "I'm sorry I wouldn't have come in if I'd known you were still here."